Imagine walking into a place where every glance feels like a challenge, every word carries the weight of history, and no one knows who you really are. Marcus Hill didn't just walk into the Blue Valley Police Department that morning. He stepped into a battlefield disguised as an ordinary precinct, a black man, dressed down, blending in, hoping to uncover truths no one wanted to face. But what happened next? A moment so raw, so charged, it would shatter assumptions and force a department to confront its darkest secrets. This isn't just a story about a badge. It's about respect, power, and a fight for justice that starts in the most unexpected way. Stay with me, because what unfolds will change how you see leadership and maybe even hope. It was just after 7 o'clock a.m. in Brookfield, Georgia, a sleepy southern town where the morning air still clung to the heat from yesterday, and folks believed they knew everyone worth knowing. As the sun stretched across Main Street, casting long shadows on the faded bricks of the local precinct, a man in a worn hoodie and faded jeans stepped quietly out of a dusty pickup truck. No one noticed him, and that was the point. Marcus Ellison wasn't just anyone. He had spent over 22 years in law enforcement, most recently leading reform in one of the toughest inner-city departments in Chicago. But today, he wasn't a chief, a leader, or a figure of authority. Not yet. Today, he was a stranger, and he wanted it that way. The Brookfield Police Department had been under fire for years. Whispers of misconduct, unjustified force, and a culture that thrived on power rather than service. Marcus had been appointed as the new police chief after a long and quiet internal investigation by the city council. But he didn't announce his arrival. No media, no handshake welcome, just a mission. To see the truth before the truth knew it was being watched. So he walked through the precinct's side door. No one looked up. A few nodded vaguely, mistaking him for a maintenance worker, or maybe someone lost. In the break room, the coffee was stale and the jokes were sharper than they should have been. And that's when it happened. A white officer, tall, broad-shouldered with mirrored sunglasses pushed up on his head, eyed Marcus like he was dirt on his boot. "Hey," he said, his voice flat with irritation. "This ain't a shelter. You're in the wrong place." Marcus held his gaze, calm, not saying a word. He wanted to see what would happen if he didn't correct him. The officer stepped closer, puffed out his chest. "You deaf or just dumb? Get your trash out of here." Then, with a smirk, he did the unthinkable. He spat right into Marcus's face. The room erupted with laughter. Marcus stood still, wiped his cheek with a folded handkerchief. His heart raced, but his face didn't flinch. "Is this how you treat everyone?" he asked softly. The officer, name tag, Red Dawson, scoffed. "Only the ones who don't belong." And that's when the intercom crackled. "All officers to briefing, mandatory." Marcus didn't say another word. He walked away slowly, his back straight, his dignity untouched. Dawson and the others went on laughing, still completely unaware they had just humiliated their new boss. As Marcus entered the briefing room through a side door, holding a sealed folder bearing the precinct's seal, the officers gathered, laughing, unaware. But what Marcus had just witnessed was more than one man's mistake. It was a crack in the foundation, and the beginning of a reckoning they never saw coming. The briefing room buzzed with the energy of routine. Chairs scraping, coffee cups clinking, conversations bouncing off the beige walls. Officer Dawson leaned back in his seat, one boot crossed over the other, still grinning from his earlier joke. Around him, a few chuckled quietly, some out of amusement, others out of habit, as if cruelty had become a language they all understood. Then, silence. Captain Monroe, the department's interim head, an aging officer with tired eyes and a stiff jaw, stepped forward. "Everyone," he said, "we have an announcement." His voice was firm but unsure, as if he knew what was coming might shake the room. The side door opened. Marcus stepped in. This time, he wasn't a stranger. Wearing a clean black button-down, a gold pin on his collar, and holding the precinct's official folder, he walked slowly to the front of the room. As he passed Dawson, the officer's smirk cracked. then faded. Whispers rippled like a slow wave across the rows of uniforms. Captain Monroe cleared his throat. "Meet your new chief of police, Chief Marcus Ellison." You could hear a pin drop. Marcus paused before he spoke, letting the weight of the reveal settle into every face. "This morning," he began, voice steady, "I walked through your halls. I was spat on, laughed at, called a nobody by some of the very people sworn to protect and serve." The silence thickened. "But what I saw was bigger than a spit, bigger than one man's hate. What I saw was a sickness beneath the badge, one that doesn't announce itself, but whispers in locker rooms, hides behind sarcasm, and festers in silence." He turned toward Dawson, who now stared at the floor. "It's easy to wear a badge, harder to carry its weight." Twist of the blade. Because Marcus wasn't here for revenge. He was here to shine a light on what everyone else pretended not to see. He went on, voice soft but piercing. "There's a kind of racism that doesn't shout. It sighs, it rolls its eyes, it makes jokes when it thinks no one's listening. It uses power not to protect, but to remind others who's in charge. That's the kind that eats a department from the inside out." You could see it in the eyes of the younger officers, some wide with shame, others blinking away the discomfort. Not everyone in that room was a villain, but enough had stayed silent long enough for the rot to spread. Marcus wasn't here to burn the house down. He was here to rebuild it, brick by truth. And that truth, hidden racism doesn't always come with a Confederate flag or slurs. Sometimes it wears a uniform. Sometimes it smiles while it excludes. Sometimes it looks like a joke until it's your dignity on the floor. Lesson whispered between the lines. It's not enough to say, "I'm not racist." Inaction is its own kind of violence. Silence, when you know something's wrong, is complicity in disguise. As the room sat frozen, Marcus knew his next challenge wasn't just confronting the obvious villains. It was waking up the bystanders, the good cops who looked the other way, the ones who felt uncomfortable but said nothing. Because systems don't fail because of bad apples. They fail when the good ones refuse to speak. And now, it was time to ask, why do they stay silent? The next morning, the briefing room felt different. No one leaned back in their chair. No one made jokes. The coffee tasted bitter. Conversations clipped. It was as if the air itself had grown thicker, heavier. Marcus stood again at the front, not behind the podium, but beside it. No barriers, no scripts. "Before we begin," he said calmly, "I need to show you something." He held up a small device, a recording pen. A few officers shifted in their seats. One coughed. "I wore this when I first walked into this building," Marcus continued, "not because I wanted to catch anyone, but because I wanted the truth to speak for itself." He pressed play, and then the room cracked open. There it was, Dawson's voice, mocking, laced with venom, the laughter, the casual disrespect. One officer said, "Bet he's just here to check our diversity box." Another added, "Probably never even patrolled a real neighborhood." Every insult, every dismissive tone, it echoed off the sterile walls like a courtroom with no judge, just the truth. No one could look up, not even Dawson. But what happened next was the real shock. Another voice chimed in, Officer Ramirez, younger, quieter, always polite. "But on the recording you heard her too. What can he even do? They'll rotate him out like the last one." That was the moment the room realized. Racism wasn't just about hostility. It was about hopelessness. Even the well-meaning had given up. Good people, wearing masks, blending into the silence. Marcus stopped the recording. He looked out at the room, no longer filled with enemies, but people suddenly unmasked. Some ashamed, some angry, some finally awake. "I don't need apologies," Marcus said. "I need courage." He paced slowly. "This wasn't just about me. It's about what happens when we all pretend we didn't hear what we heard or see what we saw. When we wear masks to survive in a broken system, but change doesn't come from pretending. It comes from standing up. And then he added, almost as an afterthought, but it hit like a hammer. By the way, not everyone in this room stayed silent. He nodded toward the back. A woman stood, Officer Chin. She was the only one who had quietly pulled Marcus aside after the first day and whispered, "I'm sorry, that wasn't okay." Marcus continued, "You don't have to shout to be brave. Sometimes bravery sounds like one voice speaking truth when the rest hide behind laughter." Lesson tucked inside the moment. Sometimes evil survives not because it's powerful, but because good people are afraid of losing comfort more than they fear losing their soul. But truth has a cost, and when one person breaks the silence, it forces others to choose, stand with justice or with the old ways. And in the days that followed, Marcus would learn just how deep those loyalties ran and how betrayal can wear a badge too. The fallout didn't come with sirens or raised voices. It came quietly, in the way doors suddenly stayed shut when Marcus walked by, in the way conversations stopped when he entered the room. The squad, once dismissive, was now fractured. Lines were being drawn, and not everyone was ready for what came next. Internal Affairs launched an immediate investigation. The recording had triggered a chain reaction no one expected, or maybe no one dared to believe possible. For years, complaints had disappeared. Officers had been transferred, not disciplined. But this time, the silence had been recorded. And silence, when captured on tape, becomes evident. Sergeant Dawson was placed on administrative leave. Ramirez was called in for questioning. Several others found themselves in awkward meetings with HR. The system had always protected them. But now, for the first time, it was looking inward, reluctantly, uneasily, but unmistakably. Still, it wasn't just them under pressure. Marcus, too, found himself isolated, not from enemies, but from those who once claimed to be allies. Officers he'd trained with began avoiding eye contact. Whispers about loyalty started to float. Some called him a snitch, a traitor. Even Officer Chen, who once spoke up for him, was now being given the cold shoulder by her own squad. The weight of change, Marcus realized, didn't just crush the guilty, it tested the backbone of the innocent. But the real twist? It wasn't Dawson who fought back the hardest. It was the department's image. PR officers scrambled. They painted the incident as an isolated misunderstanding. They praised Marcus for his commitment to transparency while simultaneously trying to push him into a desk job, something less visible, less disruptive. But Marcus refused. He hadn't come this far to be hidden away like a file someone's too scared to delete. He went to the community instead, in churches, in high schools, on the radio. He shared what happened, not to shame, but to teach. He talked about what real accountability looks like, not vengeance, but transformation, not cancellation, but consequence. One day after a small town hall meeting, an elderly black man came up to him, tears in his eyes. "I never thought I'd live to see the day," he said, voice trembling. "One of you standing for one of us." Marcus just nodded. "I'm standing for all of us." Lesson inside the wreckage. Real accountability doesn't just punish the guilty. It reveals the bystanders, the protectors of silence, the policies written in invisible ink. And if you're not ready to lose something for the truth, you might never know what real justice feels like. But while the city was waking up, not everyone in Marcus's life celebrated. Because when one man rises, others feel left behind. And sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come from strangers, but from the people who once tucked you in and prayed for your future. Change is never just about the public stage. It creeps into homes, friendships, and family dinners, places where masks slip off and true colors show. For Marcus, the battle he waged at the precinct now echoed in the quiet corners of his own life, where the divide was just as sharp and the wounds often deeper. His younger brother, Devin, once his closest ally, now avoided his calls. Devin had joined the same police force years earlier, but had always been wary of Marcus's idealism, calling it naive, even dangerous. When news of Marcus's suspension of Sergeant Dawson hit the precinct, Devon's silence wasn't just disappointment, it was a chasm. "You're betraying us," Devon said one evening, voice tight with anger. "You think you're better than everyone else, but you're just making enemies." That night, the tension at the dinner table wasn't just about family pride. It was about loyalty torn between old ties and a new vision, between resistance to change and the painful work of redemption. But Marcus refused to back down. Redemption wasn't just about punishing wrongdoers, it was about healing a broken system, starting from within. He reached out to Devon again, not as a brother lecturing, but as a man inviting conversation. "I want us to be better," Marcus said. "For the community, for the badge, for ourselves. I know it's hard, but silence is what's killing us." Devon's jaw clenched, and for a moment it seemed the gap would only widen. Yet Marcus's patience planted a seed. Meanwhile, inside the precinct, lines were drawn more clearly than ever. Officers split into factions, those clinging to the old ways, dismissing change as weakness, and those quietly eager to embrace a new culture of accountability. Whispers of traitors and allies hung in the air like a thick fog. Marcus knew the road to redemption was paved with resistance, but every day he walked those halls, meeting officers with open questions instead of closed minds. He was breaking walls brick. A surprising ally emerged in Officer Leah Santos, a veteran known for her toughness but also her fairness. She approached Marcus one afternoon after a tense meeting. "You're shaking the cage," she said, voice low but steady. "And maybe that's exactly what this place needs." Her support wasn't just a relief, it was proof that change could come from unexpected places. Yet the most profound lessons came not from victories but from losses. Marcus witnessed officers fall away, some choosing bitterness, others forced out by their own resistance. But in those losses he saw a truth. Redemption isn't about everyone coming along, it's about staying true to the path when the world pushes back hardest. Lesson in the struggle, real change tests the ties that bind us the most, our families, our closest friendships. The hardest battles aren't always fought in public, but in hearts that must choose between comfort and courage. Redemption demands patience, resilience, and the willingness to face rejection without losing sight of why you began. The journey was far from over. For every crack in the wall, a door was waiting to be opened. Marcus knew the next challenge was building bridges, not just within the precinct, but with the community that had watched and waited for change. How do you heal when the wounds run so deep? The answer might be found in unlikely conversations and the quiet power of listening. Change never comes quietly. Sometimes it roars, shaking the ground beneath those who cling to the past. For Marcus, the suspension of Sergeant Dawson was just the beginning of a storm he knew was brewing. The appeal wasn't a surprise, it was expected. What caught him off guard was how loudly the old habits would fight back. The day the appeal was filed, whispers turned into shouts. Dawson, once untouchable, rallied a faction of officers who saw Marcus's new leadership as an attack on their identity, on their brotherhood. "This isn't justice," Dawson claimed. "It's politics. It's personal." His words stirred fear and anger, and soon the precinct was divided deeper than ever. Marcus watched as meetings devolved into arguments. Loyalty questioned and resentment boiled just beneath the surface. But he stayed steady, knowing that accountability was not a moment's decision. It was a long fight against invisible currents of resistance. He dug into Dawson's file, uncovering a long trail of misconduct that had been brushed under the rug for years. It wasn't just one bad officer, it was a system protecting itself from change. Yet, in the midst of turmoil, a surprising truth emerged. Some officers, those quietly watching from the sidelines, began to speak up, not out of rebellion, but out of hope. They saw Marcus's courage as a chance to break free from the toxic cycle they'd lived with for years. One by one, their voices added weight to the call for change. Marcus didn't just fight for punishment. He fought for transformation. He held firm to the belief that discipline was only the first step, that true change meant reshaping values, hearts, and minds. The appeal was denied, But the real victory was the conversation it sparked, the hard questions asked, the self-reflection forced. Lesson in persistence. Old habits don't fade quietly, they roar, resist, and rally. But real leadership listens, learns, and stands firm, knowing that every storm survived brings the promise of clearer skies. Change isn't just about removing the bad, it's about inspiring the good to rise. Marcus's toughest battle wasn't just within the precinct, it was with the community that watched with cautious hope. Could bridges be built where walls once stood? The next chapter would reveal if healing was possible or if the scars of the past were too deep to mend. Change is often slow, like the first fragile shoots breaking through hardened soil. After the dust of confrontation settled, Marcus knew the real work was just beginning. The precinct wasn't just a building, it was a living organism, shaped by every conversation, every glance, every decision made behind closed doors. To transform it, he needed more than orders. He needed hearts. Walking the halls daily, Marcus made it his mission to connect with every officer, not as a chief, but as a fellow human being. Some greeted him with suspicion, others with quiet curiosity. Among them was Officer Lena Torres, a young recruit whose eyes held both fear and hope. "Chief," she said one afternoon, "I want to do better, but sometimes it feels like the system's bigger than me." Her words lingered in Marcus's mind, a reminder that real change requires courage from many, not just a few. He began holding small, honest meetings where officers could speak openly about mistakes, about fear, about the pressure to conform. It wasn't easy. Old wounds surfaced, voices cracked with frustration, and silence often filled the room when the hardest truths were spoken. Yet these moments were cracks in the foundation of resistance, allowing light in. Meanwhile, whispers of Dawson's suspension transformed from gossip into cautionary tales. Officers who once laughed along began to rethink their choices. But the transformation was uneven. Some still resisted openly, their loyalty to the past a fortress around them. Marcus knew patience was essential. Progress didn't demand perfection, only persistence. A turning point came unexpectedly during a community outreach event. Marcus met a boy named Jamal, shy but brave, who looked at him and asked, "Do you really want to change things?" The question struck deeper than any meeting or memo. Marcus promised, "Not just want, Jamal, we will." That promise carried weight far beyond the precinct walls. Slowly, as recruits like Lena stepped forward, voices like Jamal's echoed, and officers felt the first real stirrings of something new. A culture built on respect, accountability, and hope. Lesson in leadership: transformation isn't a sudden storm. It's a patient planting, nurturing fragile seeds of trust and respect until they grow into something stronger than old fears. True leadership is about walking the walk, day after day, in the quiet moments no one sees. With seeds planted, the future remained uncertain. Could this precinct fully heal, or would shadows from the past threaten to choke the growth? The final chapter would reveal the power of hope, resilience, and the will to keep fighting, no matter the odds. True change doesn't roar. It whispers through moments like these. Marcus Hill's story is proof that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to stand tall despite it. He didn't just expose a broken system, he dared to rebuild it from the ground up, brick by brick, heart by heart. The road ahead is still long, the wounds still raw, but every step forward is a victory for justice, for respect, for every unheard voice. So I ask you, what will you do when faced with the chance to change the story? Because this is only the beginning, and the real battle for justice is waiting. Are you ready to be part of it?